All right, welcome to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. This podcast is a ministry of Small Town Network. We exist to make disciples, train pastors, and plant churches in smaller communities. My name is Eric. I'm joined by Tony, and we have Matthew Anderson for a conclusion, a second half, if you will, to the previous episode. Excited to talk today about how Matthew arrived in Utah, how they got their church going, and their network. And so, with that, Matthew, why don't you just take off where we left off? You got the call to go to Utah, kind of a miraculous confirmation. And then what happened next? How did you get going in Utah?
Yeah, I shared my experience with my wife on the phone while I was out here, and um, she started just getting on, Google Maps or whatever, and just trying to find churches in some of these communities that we were in, that I was driving through. And man, Lord just kind of kind of broke her heart for the state too, I think, in a sense, recognizing that there's just so much opportunity here that had been kind of to some degree, untapped. And so we kind of come to this place where we knew like this is where the Lord was asking us to go. And so we didn't know what the next steps were. Would it be, because I had never been around church planting. I never even heard of it. I didn't even, I didn't, in that sense, I didn't really have like a framework for any of this stuff. So I'm like, well, I guess I better get the books and go to the conferences and do the things. But what I knew Lord was calling us to was to not change like our philosophy of ministry.
Right.
Like God, like I just felt very convicted of relational disciple multiplication stuff. And you have to understand, back in the early 2000s, that talk was not normative in Christian circles.
Right. Or
I
in planting.
felt very
Yeah.
much like early on in youth ministry, dude, I was a flipping weirdo back then.
Right.
Like
Right.
I was a total like oddball youth pastor. Like there was nobody like me. I felt like I didn't belong in Christian circles at all. So I didn't have the education. I didn't have, the systems that people did. And I just felt like a total weirdo, but I still had this conviction from Jesus that this is how I was supposed to do ministry. And I was wired that way for it too. So anyway, so we have all this stuff that we're just trying to sort out and deal with. Do we read the books? Do we go to the conferences? What do we do? What organizations are out there, that can help us? Do we need to find funding? We need to make, what do we need to do? And so it was just quite a journey of trying to figure all of that out. And so um, the conferences, the books, all the things say, well, you got to get with a church planting organization. And so the organizations that I would find um, either wouldn't call you back, like literally wouldn't call you back, or they would call you back and they'd be real eager. Like I was talking with Acts 29. I didn't know anything about them, right? I just
Right.
found they were planting churches. And then they had like this, and them and a few others. That was just one that comes to mind. There was a few others, but then they had this like doctrinal statement.
Sure.
And it wasn't that the doctrinal statement I felt was like not biblical, but they drew some pretty hard lines on some doctrinal statements that I'm like, I could totally work with people that are that way if our methods and our primary things are the same, right? If these are the same, I can work with people who, but I can't honestly with integrity say that I 100% agree with this particular doctrinal statement. So I couldn't sign any of those things to
Mhm.
work with those ministries. And so that was kind of an obstacle. And then most of them, what I was discovering, because I've been doing just tons of research on Utah and evangelistic efforts and church planting efforts in Utah. And what I realized was it wasn't that people hadn't tried that there weren't churches in Utah.
Right.
Like people have been trying to plant churches here for years. It's just been ineffective. And
Right.
so I started asking a lot of these questions. And then what I saw was this model of church planting that I didn't know anything about. It was like basically, we give you a loan, you raise the money, right? You raise the money, we give you a loan,
Yeah.
you start paying back that loan from the profits you make from your church
Yeah.
at year three.
This
At
sounds
the completion
real
of year three.
cynical,
But beginning
Matthew.
year four, you start to make your payments back. And it's like, this
Yeah.
is business model, right? This is
Yeah.
just like a business startup plan.
Mhm.
you know, and then you join, you know, it's pitched to you like, but you eventually join the investment firm,
Yeah.
right? And so you pay back your loan, and then after your loan's paid off, then you keep paying the loan because you're investing financially to plant other churches too. So it's kind of like, okay, you're now, you know, okay, you get a loan and then you become part of the investment firm 10 years later or whatever it is when your loan's paid off or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay. So we have to be financially like profitable in year 3.
Right.
It's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure.
Mormons on average, from the time they hear the gospel in a way that like makes sense to them to the time that it bears fruit in faith is about 5 to 7 years.
Mm.
I'm like, that doesn't make a lot of sense if I have to start paying back the loan at year 3 when it's a 5 to 7 year germination process for the gospel.
Yeah,
Right.
that
That
math
doesn't
ain't
make
mathing.
sense.
Now, hold on a second, because we've had previous conversations about this, and what happens to most people that try that model? Like what?
Yeah, what happens is they ramp up big. It's like, we're going to go launch, we're going to send out the flyers, we're going to spend the money, we're going to hire the associate or the youth pastor, and we're going to launch big. And then about 2.5 years in, they're going, man, I don't know how we're going to sustain this. The money's going to run out
The
soon.
money's gonna run out, or
We gotta
the
cut
money ran
back.
out. Yeah.
We gotta get out of the strip mall. We gotta cut the associate pastor's salary. And everything just kind of like starts dialing backwards. And the next thing you know, they're in their basement and they're going, maybe I didn't hear a call to Utah. Maybe it was like Sarasota, Florida or something that God was saying. And I just, my ears were plugged and I heard the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And then the thing just dies and they leave for Florida, you know?
Right. With a
And
lot of
that's like the
disappointment and
normal.
disappointment, and people that maybe did come to faith now are kind of spiritual orphans because their pastor left.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, lots of fallout from that.
It's this sense of total failure. Like these church planters feel like they just totally failed. Like, I thought so strongly I heard from God, and here I am just failing God and the kingdom and my family and everything else and the people that we came to serve. And it's just this awful, and that's the normal thing that happens out here. Like
Mm.
that would be like 8 out of 10 church plants. That's kind of what happens.
That's
Mhm.
common experience in church planning in general, but it's like intensified in a
Utah.
place like where you live. Yeah.
Big time, especially if you're making an intent to reach people from the culture and not just gather other Christians who have moved in or
Right.
gather them from other churches. Like, if your efforts are really focused on reaching the culture, it's a long process. And so we're like, man, that system just doesn't really make sense, you know? And then the organizations that we thought we might connect with, like, we looked at, you know, some other groups that are like, yeah, we don't plant churches unless the community is, you know, over 1 million people or something, you know. And it's like, okay,
Okay.
but you know, that kind of rolls out a lot of the places that we might end up.
Right.
So I went to the church that I was pastoring at the time was just not in a healthy place to like assume something like that, to like send us out and be a part of something bigger. And so I resigned from that church and we reconnected with the church I was a youth pastor at.
Oh.
And that church was in a season of kind of flourishing.
Hmm.
And I just went to the elders and I'm like, hey, here's this idea that I have, and I don't know how to make this happen. But I just kind of cast this disciple making church planting ministry idea that the Lord kind of began to shape in my heart. And they're like, yeah, we love it. Let's do it. And so we formed a DBA of Hillsboro Christian Church
Okay.
that was called Plant Utah. It was just a DBA of the church.
Huh.
And the elders were essentially our board for our organization, right?
Okay.
Wait a minute.
And the idea was, what's that?
We got to pause here for a second because this is cool. Like if for anybody that might have missed this in the first episode, this is the same group of people when you were a youth pastor and took these notes on the gospel and Acts and said, look, I'm going to hang out with kids. I'm going to disciple them. And they're like, yeah, that plan's not going to work. Now are forming a DBA to Plant Utah with that ministry model as a church plant in a Mormon culture.
Right. And the cool thing, I don't normally mention this, but
Awesome.
that church by that time, they had rewritten their vision and purpose statements. and their mission statement was disciples who make disciples.
Hey, all right. It's catchy.
And then it's kind of, and on a little sidebar, what's
Really
kind
cool.
of cool was what I didn't realize was happening back in 2001, what God was doing in me. God was also doing in a group of other guys like all over the world at the same time.
Hmm.
And I later met a guy named Jim Putnam
Yeah.
that was kind of doing the same thing. It was years later, you know, and I realized him, just a whole bunch of other people were like understanding this relational disciple making stuff and how biblical it was. And so like now all of us weirdos hang out together, you know, and it's become sort of the norm now, which is great, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we kind of formed that idea. Everything kind of started to come together. I was trying to figure out how to raise money to do this. Like, how do I survive
Mm.
moving out there to plant the church? And so I started sending out letters to churches and all over the place. And I think we raised like several $100s.
Several $100s. Yeah, welcome to
And
fundraising.
that was really deflating to me because I had been in sales before, and so I didn't think it would be very hard to pitch an idea like this to go to an unreached place to make disciples. And man, a lot of the responses I got were, well, like they're not maybe our kind of Christianity, but at least they're Christians, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or it was like, man, you're gonna, you know, those people are crazy. That'll be a tough sell. It was like very extreme opposites, you know. It wasn't, I didn't find very many churches that were like, wow, those people really need Jesus. And man, let's go reach them, you know. It was either, well, they already have Jesus, or man, that's gonna be, you know, you're gonna be beating your head against the wall over there. You know,
Do
it
you feel
wasn't.
like, Matthew, do you feel like they're like, I grew up in Oregon and a lot of my good friends are Mormons, and we had a Mormon church right across the street. And I live in Twin Falls and there's a temple here. And like, I think people in the West are like very familiar with Mormons and have a clear understanding. But when I was in the Midwest, I didn't know where a Mormon church was in the Midwest. Do you think
Yeah.
people in the Midwest just don't understand like what they're about and what that's all about?
No, it's 100% accurate. I think they have a strong misrepresentation in their mind of who LDS people are. They
Okay.
either see them as just another, you know, denomination that's Christian, or they see them as like this horrible, awful cult that's going to try to attack you and get you into their club, you know, and so
Okay.
stay away from them.
But whatever the case, they didn't want to fund you.
Yeah, they didn't want to fund it, man. It
Okay.
was, yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, that obviously is kind of not working super great. So what else could we do? So I'm like, man, I have a background in art. I used to do a lot of painting and drawing. And when I first started in youth ministry, one of the guys from our church brought me a computer. And um, I didn't really use computers. I didn't even have an email address at this time in my life. And anyway, but I was starting to have young kids, and I'm like, I have to close up the art room because my kids like destroy my art. So I packed up all my art easels and artwork, and I packed away in a closet, and I quit painting and drawing. And then this guy showed me, like, I put Photoshop on this computer for you. I'm like, what is Photoshop? It's
Mm.
like, you can do digital art. I'm like, really? So I start playing around with Photoshop, and I started creating digital art. Well, next thing you know, I'm making everything. I'm like, I had a little side hustle going where I'm like making like little flyers and magazines and business cards and like
Wow.
all kinds of stuff for people as a little side business with Photoshop. And my kids couldn't get on there and ruin it. You know, I could just hit save and there it is, saved on the hard drive. And so it's just kind of a cool way to be like express art and use it in a purposeful way. So I would build sermon series graphics and all kinds of cool stuff with it. And I was doing it for other people and had a little size business going. And I'm like, wonder how I could do this on like the internet too. So at some point I got this like website builder. You could kind of build your own little website thing. And so I played around with that, building websites, but it was really limited. And but I could build a website, you know, a functioning website and kind of make it look pretty cool. So by this time, fast forward to Plant Utah's origin, and I'm trying to figure out how to fund church planting. I'm like, you know what? I wonder, I just need to take myself to like web school. And that's when like these kind of screens were just starting to come out, and like sites were not navigable on a mobile phone at all.
Yeah.
And so like media queries were just coming out, like how you could like write code that would like reorder breathe flexibility into a website and reorder things so that it was like really beautiful on a cell phone. Like that was unheard of at that time. So I just put myself to school, man. I just started studying code, and I learned CSS and HTML and JavaScript and PHP, and I just learned all. I just got it, and I'm like learned it. And I was like a real early adopter of like mobile web design. So I'm like, I'm going to make a business, and I'm just going to create websites and sell websites. And that's how I'm going to fund church planting in Utah. I'm just going to start a business.
That's awesome.
So that's what I did. I started a business called Oikos Designs, and I started building websites, and I did everything. I started trying to target churches, like small churches, like you're a small church, your website sucks. For an affordable price, I can get you like a banging website, business cards, like everything that you need, branding package, the whole thing, So I started doing that, and that's how we started funding this thing, and
Do you still do that?
I officially quit that business at the first of this year. I transferred that business to my son.
Oh, cool.
So I worked for him though.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. We took in a boy from a polygamy community when we first moved out here. Now he owns that business now.
Oh, wow.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your vision, what I love about your vision is it wasn't just planting a church, it was being a church planting church. And that's kind of the next level. And that's when, we planted a church in 2002 in Oregon. And that really wasn't how people were talking back then. It was more about launch large, attractional. And I was 27, and that's kind of what we did. We just kind of did that approach. The second time around, we caught that vision, and it was kind of born from this idea of like, hey, I've sat like after 25 years of being part of church boards and church plant coaching, I should say church planting organization boards, church planter coaching. I heard so many guys say, we want to start a church planting church, and they draw it all up with a slick presentation, PowerPoint, and none of them did it. None of them did it. A lot of them didn't get the first one off the ground. And none of them got the second one or the third one off the ground. And so when we started here in Twin Falls, that was like number one top priority is that we are going to figure out how to be a church planting church. And a big piece of it immediately, it was kind of like you're saying, we start with that in mind. Like we want to be a church planting church. Well, and then let's work backward from that and figure out what's going to have to be true for that to be the reality and not just something that's kind of wishful thinking. And one of the pieces was the money. That we're going to have to be, in our case, bivocational. But you guys you started a church planting group of churches that where no one takes any salary. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now there's a reason though that's specific to your culture. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, and it didn't start off with like this intent to like be more culturally relevant. It was like more out of this, like I just see how God's hand was in all of it. Like it wasn't like its origin wasn't in like how can we strategically plant these churches that are going to make the most sense in our culture. Although we were looking into that, right?
Right.
It was more like I think God in his providence was like, I'm not going to fund your church plant. You need to trust me in a different way, And so we moved out here in faith. My wife applied for a job for something that she wasn't qualified for, and they offered her the job on the spot.
Wow.
So we moved out here with a job. She got offered a job, so that's how we got out here. But along the way, we discovered like, just trying everything we can to make things make sense and to work this thing out. Like we've got to make a living. We've got to survive. I have this skill. I'll use whatever skills God's given me and make the most out of that to be present where God wants us to be present, right? So that was kind of our mindset. And at the same time, we were still trying to figure out ways to fund things, even though the process that we saw to plant the church wasn't going to require the same kind of funding that had been pitched to us on how you plant the church, you know?
Right.
So we moved out here, and eventually we got down here to Spanish Fork where we're at now, and very little funding. I'm doing my web business. My wife's working as a nurse, and we make this commitment that we're not going to like have a church name or have a church project or do anything with the church for at least a year.
Okay.
Let's try to get to understand the culture. Let's just be students of our community. Let's not try to take any of our ideas and just push them on the culture and the community. Let's just be students first. Let's just really try to absorb and learn and understand, and then begin to allow like concepts and things to take shape out of those experiences that we're having. So we committed to that. And long story short, a year later, we already had people in our home, less than a year later, that were just wanting to know what we were doing and why. And so we're just reaching Mormon people and doing discovery Bible studies with them and all kinds of just disciple making, because that's what we do, right? So that was happening. And then we just like discover like, oh, actually having a paid pastor is like not a positive thing. Like the culture like views that as like really a negative thing. They have this like kind of concept because they don't have paid staff at the local level in the Mormon church. It's like that if you're getting paid from your church, like you're kind of fleecing the sheep kind of a thing, and you're in it for the money, and your intentions are off and all those kind of things. They think every pastor is trying to become Joel Osteen or some televangelist guy that's going to have a jet and fly around the world and do whatever, and that's the typical view of Christian pastors. It's very negative, and then we're in it for the money. So we're like, maybe we shouldn't try to like develop this thing in a way where it creates staff positions for pay. Maybe what we should really do is just like invest in a broader base of leaders, like train more leaders, equip more leaders for the ministry, which was already part of our DNA anyway. It's already the way that we think anyway. Like my mindset had always been in the very beginning of ministry is work myself out of a job, right? So let's just continue that type of philosophy that God's already kind of shaped in us from the beginning, and not really try to build this thing in a way that requires a full-time pastor, or a paid minister.
Right.
Like, where if that happens down the road for some, let's not be hard and fast on it. Then that happens down the road out of necessity for some reason, that's fine. But let's not create a system that requires that.
Yeah.
And so what we developed was this idea that when anything that we do in church planting needs to be cost effective, it cannot be time intensive or labor intensive. So if it's super labor intensive, super time intensive, or super cost intensive, we got it. It's not there. We get rid of
Because
that.
as a guy with a full-time job and a family, you don't have that, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. So that was kind of the concept there. And so far, all of our pastors in our church plants all have jobs outside of the ministry. They make their living gainfully employed somewhere through their own businesses.
So what you're talking about is something we discovered is like, again, having the goal and then working backward. It's like you realize quickly this is going to have to be a pretty streamlined operation, like because everyone's got other jobs and stuff. Like we don't have a facility, like programs, and like we do Sundays and we do groups. That's pretty much what we do. Discovery Bible study groups and Sunday mornings. That's kind of it. Since now that we're like 5 years old, we have a youth guy, part-time bivocational youth guy, part-time children's person. But everyone's got other jobs, everyone's doing other things. And so it's like it just forces you into this kind of very streamlined mode of church. And that has I could get way off topic on this, but that has some implications too, because when church people come and they're used to like being at a church with full-time staff and programs and facilities, they don't like it. And they don't stay usually. Because they're looking for Celebrate Recovery and a full-blown youth ministry and Awanas for the kids, and we don't have any of that. And so you kind of catch people either that are Christians without a church home that catch the vision and join in, or people who are lost and looking for Jesus, and they like
Yep.
this kind of simple, streamlined kind
Yep.
of deal. So yeah, I love hearing you say this stuff because
We're
I'm
very non-programmatic. We just don't do programs. There's a few things that we do every year, and they're things that we can do well.
Mm.
And we try to operate on that same mindset of like really what we're all about is just being disciples who make disciples in the places we live, work, learn, and play. That's what winning looks like for our church communities. So those are the things that we try to like really celebrate. And so it's not like I feel like in some church settings or many church settings, it's like you're in ministry when you're paid staff to do something,
you made it, you arrived.
and we're like, we try to say, nah, that you don't want to do that. Like, if you don't have to. Like, the bigger win is if you're making disciples in your workplace, right? Or just, or where you recreate or whatever, you've got a group of people that you're pouring into, and Jesus is being discovered and disciples are being made. That's the bigger win for us, right? When those things
Right.
are happening, and those are the things we try to celebrate. So,
Would
we
you
don't
say,
have.
Matthew, I'm sorry, would you say that this model, because this is something that we're kind of wrestling with, would this model kind of lend itself to smaller expressions of church, you think?
Oh, it does for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we have to, if you come from a very church background, you have to maybe like even reassess what your definition of church is to some degree. And
Mm.
yeah, what does that look like? What does a gathering look like? When is it meaningful church? So we do have a Sunday morning gathering. We meet in a performing arts theater. We do preaching. We take communion together. We have worship. It looks to some degree like a typical
Normal,
American
yeah,
church
yeah.
church feel. But what we'll say, and we say it, we model it like this is not the big thing for us. Like our smaller gatherings throughout the week, like that's more of a priority and importance to us. We value that over even our Sunday gathering
Yeah, for
because
sure.
that's an environment for relationship.
Mm.
So
So
let's talk for a minute. I want to watch our time, but um, how did you like go from like you got the first, gathering together, and you guys do have a church name, right? Now?
yeah, Utah Valley Church, yeah.
Utah, sorry, Utah Valley Church. How did you go from that and start implementing the vision of church planning and kind of tell us how that's gone? How many churches have you planted? Like, where did you find those guys? How did that all work? How did you do that?
It's I didn't really do anything. Didn't really do anything. Just try as best I can with the energy I have, stay committed to the calling I have. That's pretty much it. But no, this way that all of that kind of came together is we didn't know a soul when we moved to Utah, not a single person.
Wow.
And just through one connection or another, we met people who were hungry for Jesus and invited them into our home, sit around our table, eat meals together, and then we would I would memorize stories in the Bible, and we would just go through stories in the Bible. I'd tell a story and then ask Discovery Bible Study questions about that. And that grew into like where we had to leave the kitchen table and move into our basement to a larger setting. And then my wife was on Facebook one day, and we didn't have a website or anything. All we had was like a Facebook thing so we could communicate and people could find us that already had found us. So we weren't even like trying to create a broad profile at this point, but somebody had moved into town that had liked our Facebook page. My wife was like, that's interesting. So she went and kind of Facebook stalked them. And they were a couple from that on their Facebook profile said that they were graduates of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. She's like, there's Christians here. I wonder if they're planting a church. They came to plant the church because we prayed like, God, send more church planters to our town, like,
Yeah.
other church planters in this city. So she sends them a private message and she's like, are you guys church planters by chance? And they're like, we are. And so she just reached out to him, invited them to get together. Well, they started coming over to our house church at our house.
Mm.
And man, it was just like a really sweet connection. They were a younger couple than us, but we just had this like really cool, like bonding experience between us. And so we're like, man, how can we help each other out? Like we had a really shared vision for disciple making and multiplication through discipleship and like churches planting churches kind of stuff. And they had never experienced a lot of that. To them, it was like more theory, right? With the disciples making and all that kind of stuff. It was like they believed in it, but they hadn't really fully experienced it. We began to discover. But we're like, how can we just like fan each other's flames and like help each other make this thing happen? Plant 2 churches here in this town. This is going to be so cool. We were all excited. So we were doing a lot of stuff together, and they started like a Bible study kind of a thing going on, kind of what we were doing. They started one, and they were still coming to ours. And um, man, we had a really cool experience. I'm sorry, it's all narrative for me how this happens because it was
Sure.
not strategy, right? It didn't happen by strategy.
That's okay.
What happened was after we were doing this stuff together for about a year, this guy's name's Kyle. Kyle and I had an elk tag and we're bow hunting. And we're up in the woods, and this place we were wanting to get to, the wind wasn't right. It's on a Sunday afternoon. So I'm like, dude, let's just pray. Let's just sit here in the woods till the wind shifts or till we figure out what's going on. Let's just pray together. So, dude, we just had this Holy Ghost prayer time, man. It was awesome. Me and Kyle just in the elk woods, and it gets really still and quiet. And we're just like trying to pray for the direction of our church plants and this kind of stuff. And they were struggling because they were yellow lighted in assessment.
Okay.
Their assignment was go to this church plant in Utah
Hmm.
as a resident there and serve there. Well, the week that they got there, the planter resigned,
Oh my.
Oh,
left. So here
Oh.
he is a resident in a church plant that did exactly what we talked about earlier in the podcast.
ran out of money.
Planter left, ran out of money, and it shrunk down to nothing. And the denomination forgot about him because they still hadn't been approved to plant the church yet, technically, but they were sent there with the intent that they would do the residency and then plant out of that church plant. But that church plant died. So they're kind of orphaned out there. And so we're just praying about their church and figuring out how to help them and just all this stuff. And while we're praying, man, in this dead silence, like this tree falls behind us. And I'm like, what just happened? And then Kyle opens his eyes and I look at him, he looks at me and he's like, was that weird? I'm like, yeah, that was weird, dude. And I don't know how a tree falling in the woods did this, but it's almost like God was saying, I'm listening to you, dude. I'm right here, man. And he gave us like this insight that we weren't supposed to plant 2 churches. We're supposed to plant tons of churches.
Hmm.
The way that this was to happen was the 2 of us were supposed to connect as a team and not plant 2 churches initially, but plant the church that would plant churches, that would plant churches, that would plant churches. Like he brought us to the same place at the same time to work together as a cohesive team. So that's kind of how everything started kind of rolling there. And we went and we just found ourselves in just like total unity with the direction of the Holy Spirit to like just team up and do this thing together. And the funny thing was our church plant was named Utah Valley Church. That was what they wanted to name their church plant. But they
Oh,
discovered that there was a Facebook page that already had that name. So they went with something else. So anyway, we just totally merged our efforts together. And then from that, we just always said from the very beginning, like, we don't ever want to be a hybrid. We don't want to be a mule. We don't want to be a tiger trout, right? Those are things that get created as a hybrid that never reproduce. Like we need to be reproducing at every level all the time. So we never want to put a mark out there that says when we get to this size, we'll plant another church. Like
right. Yeah.
we were just fully in agreement on that. Like we're never going to put standards out there to say this is when we're going to do it. Like we're always going to be expecting that that's going to be happening. And so we're always looking and praying for God to send planters to us or for us to raise up planters from among us, right? And so let's just make that happen. And so we've had all of the above happen. Planters that came up through our culture that were Mormon people that came to know Jesus, and we've sent out the plant guys that tried to connect through other organizations, and for one reason or another, that organization said, "Hey, we don't know that you're a fit for us because X, Y, or Z. Your city's not big enough, or because of this or that. But why don't you go to this plant Utah people that we've met, you know? And so we've had like a number of planters, a few planters come to us through organizations. One of our planters came because I built this church a website.
That's
No
awesome.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, I built this church a website, and then God called him to move to Utah to plant the church. So, it's just been all the above. And so we've had church plants that have come and failed. That has happened too.
Mm.
And some that have stuck. We've got a really thriving church plant down in St. George right now. And they're looking to try to find somebody that would come in as a resident or multiple people that would come into their church that they could send out to plant. We've done church planter residencies for 2 guys that we've sent out of our church. And now we have 2 guys that are with us now in residency. So that'll be 4 church plants out of ours last few years that we're excited about.
So
So
what year did you guys start?
we moved out here in 2013. We really started in 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. So it's
Okay.
been about 10 years we've been going at it.
And in that time, how many churches have come from that original church?
I guess we planted 5 churches out of that. 2 of those have packed up, and gone elsewhere. So
Is it are the people, so you kind of talked about different streams, people outside, people from inside.
yeah.
What I'm trying to pinpoint here, which I really like, is it feels like you're really kind of trying to identify where the Lord is working and how the Spirit is directing, and then saying, let's go there. Or am I saying that right? Am I
Yeah, and I
correct?
think it's always this balance, I think, for me of, do we create a system and a process? And then everything has to fit within that system and that process that we create? Or do we try to stay flexible and adaptable and go where the Spirit's leading, like in this stuff, and not get super rigid? And so I think there's some combination of the 2 of those, like operate in the way that God's given you strengths and abilities, like go in that direction, but just be totally willing to switch gears or turn on a dime if the Lord leads in a different direction, right? If that's
Right.
truly where the Lord's leading.
Right.
Just be flexible, just not be too rigid. And I think of, going through Book of Acts with a group of guys right now, and just that reminder of, like, even the Apostle Paul so dead set on going to Asia, and it's like, but the Spirit of Jesus forbid, but the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit forbid, like we can get our mindset in a certain direction and resist like the real leading of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes the Spirit doesn't, he tells you where not to go. And sometimes that's where you had planned to go. And those are the dreams and the directions that you're moving in. And he's like, just don't go there, but he doesn't really tell you where to go. But you end up in a place where maybe you're in jail, but the jail keeper tries to kill himself, and you tell him about
Yeah.
family gets baptized, and then
Yeah.
a church starts out of that, right?
That's just history. Yeah. I
So
love that,
just
man. I love that because, I think part of when people hear like, man, you guys planted 5 churches in 10 years, they'll go like, wow, that's amazing, right? We started planting churches and people were like, wow, that's amazing. And I told a guy recently, I appreciate you being, complimentary and all that. I go, but here's the thing. I think what we're doing is probably the lowest level of obedience to the Great Commission that you probably could do. Um, we're trying to make disciples. From disciples, we're trying to identify potential pastors, and from pastors, we're trying to plant churches. I don't think there's anything exceptional about that at all. I think that's probably the lowest level of obedience that every church should strive to obey. And the fact that people think it's exceptional is the commentary on where we're at as the church. The fact that makes you stand out should be to our shame, not to our credit.
right.
And I'm not saying that to try to like deflect praise or act humble. I'm convicted. I'm under conviction that we're not doing our jobs,
Yeah, that
and
is
new
convicting.
churches spinning off of existing churches should be the natural overflow of discipleship. And the fact that no one, but most people are not doing that, thinking about it, or ever had it happen is probably pretty strong indication that we're not doing the job of making disciples. And so like, man, how do we how do we activate people and get them that vision of like, hey, you can do this. It's not rocket science, but it has to start with that prayer and that like listening to what is God doing? Where is he working? And how can we team up? Like God's like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Like, how can we help? You know, can we send our best and brightest away? We told our church here recently, like, we can't afford to keep our best and brightest. The kingdom needs them.
Mhm.
If we hoard all that talent and that wealth of talented people, the kingdom suffers for it. Our church might grow, but the kingdom needs to grow. And so that shift in thinking that you guys are embodying, I think we need to get these stories out because people need to hear like, we could do this. This isn't rocket science. So, are you with me on that? Is that making sense?
Man, 100%. And I think what it comes back to is just this idea of trying to maintain a humble heart and a willing spirit, and then just trying to identify other people that are there in their own faith journey. Like you said brightest and best. To me, the brightest and best are people with a humble heart and a willing spirit.
And workers, yeah, people that actually want
You
to
know
do.
what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like,
Willing, yeah, yeah.
so yeah, just trying to stay in that place yourself the best you can, or return to that place over and over and again, and identifying those people who are there too.
Yeah.
So, and along the way, you do, other ideas can creep in, like, and they do, you can have mission drift and all that kind of stuff. Like, it happens. And you have to keep realigning yourself with, like, what are the things that really matter most? And what specifically has Jesus called us to? And what's my vision versus his vision? And, you got to keep sifting through that and letting the stuff that's your vision die, and let the only thing, I think of life as like this big sieve, and Jesus throws his stuff in here. Here's what I want for you. And I've thrown my stuff in there, and it becomes this thing that's my vision. And that has to really, get shaken through the turbulence of life and trials and all this stuff. And you just pray that everything that's mine will just fall out the bottom, right? And the only thing that's left are the things of Jesus. So let life come, let family hardship come, let financial hardships come, let all these things come, because that shakes that sieve that allows the things that are my dreams to collapse and to break off and to fall through the screen, and it's just more of just the things of Jesus that are left, right? And so I think just staying after that, embracing the hardships of life so that only the stuff of Jesus is left. That's success for me.
Well, that's fantastic, man. Listen, why don't we end on that note? But how do people get in touch with you guys? How do they find out more about your stuff? I'm guessing you guys have a website.
You do, it's just plantutah.com.
Okay,
You can even
plantutah.com.
do just a Google search for church planting in Utah, and we'll probably come up. So
Do you guys have a pretty rad website? I mean, you're a web
it
designer.
isn't, dude. Like, I'm like the mechanic that, like, his own car doesn't run very well,
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
It's like old, very old now.
Man, we really appreciate your time. I love chatting
Yeah.
with you. And I said off camera, I said, I don't think I've actually met you in person before. That's wrong. I went to your church. We were on
You did. You
vacation.
stopped by
Yeah,
traveling through.
couple years back. It might have been like 4 years ago, like
It
before
would
even
have been, because I think Blade was with us then. Remember Blade?
yeah, and he came up and yeah. So yeah, I have met you in person. So
Yeah.
I just remember you taller. You're like a giant in the faith, I guess. And that's what my impression is like.
I appear taller than I am for whatever reason.
Well, let's be honest here. Eric isn't tall,
I'm
so
not tall either. I'm also 5'7". Yeah.
Five
I would like
seven.
to say average, Tony. I'm not short. I'm average.
I'm pretty sure 5'10" is the average height for most males in America. But
I'm talking
anyways,
about I'm talking about global, bro. Global. China's lower in the average for me. All right. Well, hey, let's do our wrap up here and we'll move on here. So thanks for listening. Obviously, we're glad to have had Matthew with us for these 2 episodes. If you like what we're doing, please like or subscribe. If you're interested in Small Town Network, you can find us online at smalltownnetwork.com. And if you believe in the importance of planting disciple-making churches in smaller communities, we'd love you to consider partnering with us in prayer and financial support. You've been listening to the Small Town Pastor Podcast.